In the first of this series, I explained why in the life sciences industry, a strategy expert is not the same as a competent strategy professional. To do that, I used ideas from Roger Kneebone's excellent book, Expert, in which he says that expertise is the result of mastering three things: mastering oneself, mastering knowledge, mastering relationships. In the second in the series, I looked at mastering oneself, especially the counter-instinctive mastery of using critical, reflective systems to thinking. In this third piece, I'll cover mastering knowledge, and in the next I'll cover mastering relationships, still in the context of being a strategy expert in pharma, medtech or related businesses. For a genuine strategy expert, mastering knowledge is both important and becoming more difficult. That's because technology makes consuming data a little bit like trying to drink from a fire hose. But if you observe how true strategy experts do master knowledge in practice, you'll see that they do it by acquiring three skills: differentiating, scanning and crafting. Listen carefully to the conversation among your colleagues when they're discussing market research or business intelligence. You'll hear four nouns being used all of the time: data, information, knowledge and insight. These are four different words, but they are almost always used interchangeably as synonyms for each other. This, it turns out, is a mistake, because in fact they're four quite different things. Now, this lack of semantic precision is more than just splitting hairs. Just as an expert chemist would never interchange ion, atom and molecule, a strategy expert understands that these four nouns have four very different meanings, and that differentiating between them is the foundation of mastering knowledge. Data, or merely records. When they're structured, we call it information. When more than one kind of information is combined, it creates knowledge, which can be either declarative, causal or procedural. And a small set of knowledge is valuable, and we call that subset of knowledge insight. It's analogous to an expert musician's ability to differentiate between tone and timbre, or tempo and rhythm. This is perhaps especially true for biomedical strategy experts, who have to master three overlapping domains of knowledge: medicine, their market and their product technology. Without semantic differentiation, this torrent of diverse knowledge overwhelms a merely competent strategy professional. And being overwhelmed by knowledge is what makes us revert to expedient but less effective Systems 1 heuristics, as I described earlier in this series. If you continue to listen to your colleagues talking, two other themes will emerge: complexity and turbulence. In biomedical markets, complexity is seen in that wide range of factors that influence strategy. These include sociological issues such as politics and demographics, but also technological issues like clinical developments and new product innovation. Turbulence in medical markets is when all of those factors change. So from epidemiological shifts to payer cooperation, and from CRISPR to AI, the rate of change in biomedical markets is dizzying. And together, complexity and turbulence makes mastering knowledge more difficult. Expert strategists deal with this problem by changing their scanning behaviour. Now, scanning is simply the continual, undirected observation of the market environment. All strategists scan their market, but there are three approaches to scanning that typify strategy experts and separate them from most other strategists. The first is how they use others to help them scan. Strategy experts tend to mitigate the complexity and turbulence of the market environment by assembling and using scanning teams. Importantly, these teams are quite often designed to be cognitively diverse, because the best scanning is done by teams from varied disciplines with different ways of looking at the world. The second characteristic of strategy expert scanning is its breadth and its depth. Most competent strategists compensate for the difficulty of environmental scanning by narrowing and shortening focus. Typically, they scan within the bubble of market factors that are immediately and directly relevant to their market. Interestingly, strategy experts go the other way. They widen their scanning to include factors that might indirectly impact on their market. So, for example, the reduction in the cost of genomic profiling or changes in political attitudes towards healthcare funding both fit into this category. Experts also lengthen their focus to consider factors whose impact is years away. Trends such as demographics and internet connectivity are both examples of this. For strategy experts, the scanning mantra is capture everything, sociological and technological, near and far. The third characteristic scanning behaviour of strategy experts is their focus on synthesis over analysis. Most strategists are encouraged by modern technology to concentrate on slicing and dicing the data. For some strategists, this becomes almost an end in itself rather than a means of understanding the market. Strategy experts choose instead to focus on weaving together rather than dissecting information. They do this by first drawing out the immediate implications of each factor that they pick up in the scanning. So, for example, epidemiological shifts might imply increased demand. Then they look at how those first order implications interact with each other. For example, increased demand could combine with slowed economic growth to create a second order implication of increased peer demand for demonstrable value. The very best strategists have an impressive ability to synthesize the implications of a large number of market factors, and they identify second, third and fourth order implications. So when a strategy expert masters knowledge, the first thing they do is to scan differently. Just like a carpenter with wood or a tailor with cloth, strategy experts have a fluency and a familiarity with their raw material, which in this case is knowledge. And their ability to use teams to scan widely and to synthesize higher order implications is very reminiscent of the way those craftsmen can read the grain of the wood or to sense the weave of the fabric. The complexity and turbulence of biomedical markets makes this apparently innate talent even more important than it is in other sectors. And I say apparently innate because, despite the fact that it seems instinctive, strategy experts, when I ask them, describe how this talent only emerges after years of deliberate practice. As important as scanning is, it usually only provides knowledge that is available to other strategy experts who can also scan broadly and deeply and then synthesize. Most effective strategies, however, depend not just on knowledge, but on that special subset of knowledge known as insight that the rivals don't possess. In biomedical markets, we see examples of insight when firms identify, for example, contextual segments from peer, patient and professional needs, or when they identify organisational strengths that are implicit in a firm's relationship with key opinion leaders. True insight, that is, knowledge that has the properties of an organisational strength, rarely, if ever, comes from scanning alone. Instead, it's crafted from information. The crafting of insight is the third skill, after differentiating and scanning, that separates a strategy expert from their less expert colleagues. Strategy experts have three ways of crafting insight, which are based on the three forms of logical reasoning that have been understood since the time of the ancient Greeks. The first is deductive reasoning, which involves making and testing a hypothesis, an if-then statement. So, for example, if the market is price sensitive, then we would expect to see low-cost brands to have the largest market share, and if not, then we would not. So deductive reasoning like this sharpens existing ideas or sometimes disproves them. It's a form of knowledge creation, and if that knowledge happens to be valuable, then it is then insight creation. The second way of crafting insight is inductive reasoning, which involves drawing out generalizations from specific observations. So, for example, interviews with prescribers about their use of practice guidelines might reveal the general insight that, in fact, prescribers are independent and idiosyncratic in their prescribing behaviour. Again, if that generalization that emerges is valuable, then the inductive process has created insight. The third approach to crafting insight is abductive, which is a method that lies somewhere between induction and deduction. Abduction begins by identifying a number of alternative explanations for interesting phenomenon and then seeing which is best supported by the data. So, for example, the slowness of uptake in a new product could be attributed to its costs, or to unfamiliarity with its mode of action, or lack of sales and marketing effort. In this example, numerous data sets, market shares, trial data, uptake behaviour, formally attitudes would supply greater or lesser support for each theory. If the outcome is strong support for one explanation and refutation of the other explanations, and if that knowledge is valuable, then again insight has been created, this time abductively. Strategy experts are distinguished from ordinary strategists in how they craft insight. Most strategists will either confuse insight with ordinary knowledge, or they will guess at it, using the heuristic system 1 thinking, with all the cognitive flaws that accompany that way of thinking. By contrast, when I look at genuine strategy experts, I can almost hear their purposeful thinking processes grinding away within their heads. Depending on the situation and the information available from scanning, they can choose to use inductive, deductive or abductive reasoning, and sometimes a combination of all three. But in any case, they direct that reasoning towards creating causal, declarative or procedural knowledge that is valuable and therefore is genuine insight. To the ordinary strategist, what stands between them and mastery of knowledge are external factors. They say that they don't have enough data or information, or they have too much, or that it's not of the right quality or the right type. This can sometimes be true, but in practice in big companies, strategists can rarely blame these things. Even when it is true, it can be fixed relatively easily with good research. By contrast, when I talk to strategy experts in action, it reveals that the real barriers to mastering knowledge are in the head of the strategist. What really prevents an ordinary strategist from using knowledge as effectively as an expert strategist is the lack of the 3 skills I described in this article. Differentiating, scanning and crafting are 3 hard-learned abilities that mark out a genuine strategy expert. So in this piece I've tried to build on the first of Kneebone's masteries, mastering oneself, with the second, mastering knowledge. That takes us 2/3 of the way to becoming a strategy expert. In the next piece, I'll cover the rest of the journey by discussing Kneebone's third concept, mastering relationships, in the context of a biomedical company.